Welcome to another episode of We Don't Die. I'm your host, Sandra Champlain, author of the international best-selling book called We Don't Die, A Skeptic's Discovery of Life After Death. And just a reminder, you can find my home base at wedon'tdie.com, where you can always attend one of our free Sunday gatherings with medium demonstrations. If you'd like to enter your name and email address at the bottom of the page at wedon'tdie.com, you get a free copy of my book and a whole bunch of free goodies. I also have a Patreon community. So if you're a super fan of my work and wish to support it, you can. You'll get episodes before the general public, all commercial free. And then between this show and my other podcast, Shades of the Afterlife, I now have over 700 hours of episodes. So you'll get a full clickable list of everything I've ever done. How about that? Our guest today is one of my most favorite people in the world. Brian Smith is the author of the book, Grief to Growth, Planted, Not Buried, How to Survive and Thrive After Life's Greatest Challenges. He hosts the podcast, Grief to Growth. He's also a life coach who is passionate about the transformative power of grief, the importance of forgiveness, and that we can all live life with a sense of purpose and fulfillment. You can find out more about Brian at his website, grief2growth.com. That is with the number 2. Plus, you can visit YouTube and just type in Grief to Growth. He's got so many incredible and empowering episodes there. Brian, my friend, welcome back to We Don't Die.
It's great to see you again, Sandra.
Great to see you too. I am a fan of your work, a follower of your emails and all kinds of things. And I know we've spoken a couple of times. It's been a few years that we've done an interview, but I'm so impressed with your passion and how much you're doing and you're sharing. And I thought maybe it's time to reconnect. You can let us know a bit about your story and what got you into this. I know you've interviewed a bunch of people since we've last spoken. Maybe you have a few afterlife stories to share from your favorite guests, but also to catch up with what you're doing and the impact you're now making. So if it's okay, I'd love to turn it over to you and just talk.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I should let everybody know you and I have been friends for many years. I always love coming back and being able to talk to you. After my daughter passed away in 2015, it was June of 2015. I don't think I was even listening to podcasts at the time. I was struggling. I was trying to figure out, what do I do? How do I move forward? And something nudged me and said, listen to podcasts. And yours was one of the first two that I discovered. I think yours was actually first. And I've listened to pretty much every episode. So I have to say, I would not be doing this if it weren't for me finding your work and being inspired what you did, getting your book, We Don't Die. And I remember specifically learning about grief and what is grief. And my wife and I listening to your audio laying on the bed after my daughter passed away. And just being inspired, like, okay, this is how I move forward, and having this understanding that we don't die and having an understanding now of what grief is. So I've been blessed to find people to kind of lead me along the way. And after about, I guess now about 4 or 5 years of listening to podcasts and stuff and working with Helping Parents Heal, getting a lot of support from them, I decided that it's time for me to try to give back. So that's when I launched my podcast. I heard you say you're up over 700. I'm over a little bit over 400 podcasts now, which is really hard to believe that I've been doing this that long. But I really enjoy talking to people who have been through challenges, whether it's the loss of a person or other types of things that they've been through, people who've had near-death experiences, mediumship, all those things, to really answer the question of who we are, why we're here, where we're going, what's this all about? I feel like a lot of people are really lost. And so you said talking about finding purpose. And it's really ironic because it wasn't until after my daughter passed away that I really understood like what the purpose of life is. And it's so weird how that just seems to be part of human nature. We come here, we've got the veil, we forget why we're here, we forget who we are, and it takes some event to wake us up. And a lot of times that happens to be a grief event. So what I try to encourage people to do is you can't control this event happening to you, it's happened, but you can control how you respond to it. What do I do with it? So that's what I really try to help people understand is like, you can take this and you can transform it into something else.
Thank you. Could you talk a little bit about the afterlife? Maybe some of the things Shayna did and some of the guests you've had on that I think you're like me. Sometimes you hear some stories and they just give you the goosebumps like, oh my gosh.
I could talk all day about like signs that Shane sent me, synchronicities, dream visits, etc. But what's really wild is when I talk to my clients about their synchronicities and stuff. And I was just talking with a client yesterday, and I've only met with her a couple of times, but I would say something, and she's like, "This exact same thing happened to me." So I believe that our kids, has a child in spirit just like I do, and I think our kids kind of lead us into meeting the right people and having the right experiences. Just another quick example: I had lunch with a guy a couple days ago, and this guy, his daughter had passed away. He was going through her Spotify list, and somehow, when you get on those lists, one thing leads to another, and he found my podcast. So he starts listening to my podcast, and he's talking to a friend of his, and he goes, "I found this guy's podcast, and it's really been helping me out a lot." It turns out this guy is a mutual friend. Neither one of us had any idea. He's this guy. His name is Dwight, and he was talking to Dwight, and Dwight goes, "I know that guy. His name is Brian Smith. He lives like 40 minutes from here." So it's just really wild how this guy had no idea where in the world I lived, and he happens to live just a few minutes from me. So we've gotten together. We've had lunch since then. So those are the little everyday synchronicities that happen. And again, I believe our kids kind of somehow they find a way to lead us to these things. I don't know how it works, but it absolutely does. And so when I talk to my guests, they tell similar stories about things that their loved one in spirit did, things that they left for them. And the reason why these stories are important is I think that we all get these signs and synchronicities, but a lot of times we don't recognize them. And so hearing other people's stories help us to recognize them, to understand them, and to validate it because they're so wild. The client I was talking to yesterday, she's just said, "This is wild." The stuff her son sends to her, and we were both saying it, even after all the years it's been happening, it's still sometimes hard to believe. So we still need that validation, those reinforcements.
I agree. I've been at this game 27 years exploring the afterlife. You would think that I would wake up and just embrace it all, but I think it's part of our human beingness to forget who we really are. So
Yeah.
it takes interviews like these and talking to people to kind of remind us, who are we?
Yeah, and I'm a very rational person. My background's in engineering. From the time I was a little kid, I always like to figure out how things work. So when it comes to these things, we look at things. We think we live in a cause and effect world. This happens, then B happens, and if we can't see the cause and effect, then it's not really real. And I'm still struggling with like, okay, how do these things work? How does and I the conclusion I've come to is, we understand certain inputs as an engineer speaking. We understand certain inputs lead to certain outputs, but some systems are too complex for us to understand. For example, the weather used to be. It used to be the weather just happened. We had no way of really understanding what was causing what. But now we have weather forecasts that go out 30, 45 days, et cetera. So as we have more of an understanding, we can understand how these things work. So when people dismiss synchronicities because they say they're impossible, I'm like, there might be a rational explanation. We just don't understand it yet because we don't understand how spirit interacts with us. So I'm still struggling with the how, but I absolutely 100% know that it happens.
I don't know if we'll ever figure out the how, maybe someday or maybe from the other side, but something that helps ground me is that when I think of the ever expanding universe and then our planet Earth is just like a little blip, right? We can't get our heads around that. No scientists can get their heads really around that. And then if we go down to our quantum level, all we are is invisible vibrating energy, these
Right, right.
strings of quarks or whatever they are. So I think it sometimes it takes that for me. Even looking at you right now, we're using Zoom and have our computers on and cameras and such. But looking at everything in my vision, everything somehow, Brian, came from this rock called Earth. Like
Mhm.
I think for me, sometimes when we get present to the miracle of life, really, and the miracle of us, sometimes then we can break down that barrier and uh, cast away that skeptical mind of how everything works and and everything, just to start and be present. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I love the analogy where you talked about us just even being able to communicate, because I that's the analogy I use with people all the time. I'm like, go back 100 years and explain to somebody the internet and Wi-Fi. I remember when I first heard about Bluetooth, I was working for IBM where it was developed. And they said it's this little low powered network that works over the air. And we're all like, what does that even mean? It seems impossible. So the reason why this is important is we shouldn't dismiss something just because we don't understand it. And that's what materialists do. They say that's impossible, which is what we would have said about wireless communications 100 years ago, or television, or anything that we consider to be mundane now. So, what I try to do is help people understand, let's expand the possibilities. Just because you don't understand this doesn't mean it's not real. And then, related to an everyday thing we've all had happen, you're thinking of someone that you may not have spoken to in years, and then they call you, and people say, well, that's just a coincidence, but we've all had that experience. So again, I'm like, what's the cause and effect? Did my thought send out, something that made them call me? Did I pick up on the fact that they were going to call me? I don't know, but I know that it's happened to me many times.
I agree. And if our phones and computers are able to pick up these wireless signals, why can't we?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. From the people that you've interviewed, I'm sure you run the gamut of near-death experiences and deathbed visitations and mediums and things like that. What do you think it's all about? I guess what I'm asking is, when we pass, what's waiting for us? I have my own beliefs. I know other listeners do as well. But
Hmm.
from all that you've gleaned from the people that you've interviewed in your own journey, what is it that you believe as far as when we pass and the purpose of life?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that I've realized, is I want to alleviate fear. I'd rather talk about more like what doesn't happen when we pass, because we fear things like punishment. We fear annihilation. Maybe I just cease to exist. And I want to assure people that neither one of those things happens, that there's no outside punishment that we receive, that we definitely go on. We definitely survive this thing that we call death. So that, I hope, will alleviate fear for a lot of people. I happen to grow up in a very fear-based religion, and I went from fearing this God that was going to condemn me to hell to maybe there's nothing, right? Because once I realized that wasn't true, I thought, well, if that part they told me wasn't true, maybe there's nothing. So then I feared that. And I think a lot of us have one of those two fears. So one of the things I want to say, that from all the evidence we have from mediumship, from near death experiences, and a whole bunch of body of evidence, there is no eternal punishment. It's really interesting. I always look at the outliers. I want to explain, like, there are some less than positive near death experiences. I've interviewed a couple of those people because I want to understand, what their experience was. And my belief from understanding that is it's very temporary. It's actually self-imposed. It's people that feel guilt, that don't feel like they are able to move on. Again, but those are the outliers. The vast majority of people say they experience peace, unbelievable unconditional love. They experience oneness. Um, you experience kind of like, it's interesting because some people might experience a beach scene or a forest or a city. And I've heard some people say, well, that's all hallucinations, because they're saying different things. And I tell people, well, if you came to Earth, right, and you came to New York City, you'd experience one thing. If you went to the beach, you'd experience another thing. If you went to a forest, and if you ask someone what's Earth like, they would say, "Oh, it's like this. There's trees and there's thousands of animals." And someone else would say, "Well, no, it's all concrete. It's all concrete." So I believe the afterlife is vast. It's as complicated as this, or as intricate, or as this, at least. I view our existence now as a shadow of where we come from. And I believe that this is not our home. This is some place that we're passing through. And that when we go back home, it'll be, a lot of people also fear like what we're not going to be able to have when we cross over. Oh, I love, going to the beach, or I love playing the guitar, or I love golfing. And I'm not going to be able to have that in spirit. I think you can. I think you can have those experiences. So that's what I've gleaned to this point. But the biggest thing that again I wanted to say I want to take away is like there's nothing to fear. It's all good. Everything I've heard is all good.
I agree. And fear is a human based thing. And we all have that negative little voice in our head. And from everything that I've researched and understood, that little negative voice doesn't get to come with us on the other side. Hallelujah to that.
Yeah,
Hallelujah. I'm fascinated with the near death experiences that have verifiable or veridical information. And I
yeah.
think this in science is has it was a few months ago, it was over the winter time, came out publicly and said we can no longer say that near death experiences are just part of the brain shutting down because of this verifiable information. The blind people who've never had vision can accurately see and
Hmm.
see what's happening in the hospital room and float above the building and things. So I think science, we'd always brush off, oh, science doesn't have any proof. You know, yeah, there's a lot, and there's a lot of scientists that are involved with exploring the afterlife.
Absolutely. I go back and forth in this because again, I have a very scientific background and I love the veridical stuff and I love what science is able to prove. But I realize our Western bias says if science can't prove it, it doesn't exist. So I don't want to play into that. So I do love giving people evidence. And, Julie Beisel has done research on mediums. Gary Schwartz has done research on mediums. Penny Sartori's done research on near death experiences. Bruce Grayson's written some great stuff. And they give some really good examples that you can give to the skeptics and say, look, this guy, saw this. Or my friend Penny, when she had her experience, she saw her sister driving in the rain. And when her sister found out she was in the hospital and she knew what she was wearing, she was able to describe you were driving in the rain and what she was wearing. So that's really, really cool. But to me, those are great, but they validate the other experiences that aren't veridical that still carry the same message. So I love the veridical ones, but I don't want to discount the ones that don't have that verifiable evidence because they deliver messages that are also really cool, and some of them are veridical in different ways. Like someone goes over and they have a near death experience, and they come back and suddenly they can play the piano, and they've never taken a piano lesson in their life, or they can draw, or they can write music. As one guy, he writes symphonies now, and he'd never been trained in music. So there's things like that. There's just changes that people have after they've had this experience. So there's a ton of evidence to talk about. We'll get back to what we're talking about for the skeptic, that if they just look at it and I think it's the way I would put it is it's provable beyond a reasonable doubt. There are different levels of proof. We can't prove it to a logical conclusion. We can't say we know what happens 100% certain to by logic that afterlife exists. But if we had to go to a court of law and put this in front of a judge or a jury, it's definitely provable beyond any reasonable doubt.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that. What I've got my teeth into right now is the last episode that aired just before yours. I talked to Dr. Tom Nemi from Australia. He's a clinical psychologist who heard one of my earlier episodes talking with Dr. Alan Botkin about IADC therapy, grief
Hmm.
therapy. And he was walking his dog and he's like, this can't be. This sounds too good to be true. He took the training and now he's an IADC therapist. And so I think it's great because it really alleviates grief, but in 75% of the people, it almost transports them to seeing or feeling or experiencing their deceased loved one. And so I have his book, and I was doing some more research last night and combing the internet through for some of Dr. Alan Botkin's work. And I found that in this IADC experiences, people can witness someone else's near death experience. So many times when they're having their grief therapy and working through things and they're seeing into through the veil, I guess you'd say, but they can see people rise out of their body. They can see the tunnel. They can see the light. They can see reunions with their loved ones. So I think wherever we are on our journey, there's always something more that we can discover. And I'm sure you, like me, all of a sudden there's something new or a different view on something. And then,
Hmm.
we get excited. And I think, Brian, when we're excited, we want to share. And that's just natural. That's why you have 400 podcasts and, I have a bunch as well. So, Yeah, it keeps us on our toes, keeps life exciting, keeps us interested. Brian, I wouldn't mind talking a little bit about grief and grief to growth. Many people join your programs and mine because they are deeply grieving. Yes, we
Mhm.
want evidence of the afterlife, but just having that evidence does not squelch our grief. Can we
Right.
talk a little bit about grief, the journey, whatever you wish to share that might just help give a little hope, a little comfort, and that grief to growth?
Sure. As I've worked with people, and I work a lot with parents who've lost children, and first I want to say there's nothing universal about grief in terms of how we go through it. Everybody's journey is different. It's unique. The stages of grief has been misused quite a bit. I try to tell people wherever you are on your journey, you're right. You're right where you need to be. There are some commonalities that a lot of people have that I could think can block your processing of your grief. One is anger. People who are holding a lot of anger towards, and it's interesting. It could be toward the person that you feel is responsible for your loved one's death. It could be towards your loved one themselves, the one that passed away. And then there's what I call, or there's guilt, which is what I call anger turned within. So people turn their anger on themselves and they feel guilty. And so these things can really help, can really restrict you from processing your grief. So the first thing I do when I'm working with people is like, do we have one of these two things going on, or both, anger or guilt? And if we do, how do we move past that? And as you said, then the evidence of the afterlife, your loved one is still with you. And what I learned after Shayna passed, because I'd done all this research, near death experience, mediumship, I was just reading, constantly about all these things. But I didn't realize I could still have a relationship with Shayna. I didn't realize our loved ones are still here, that they still care about us. They're still witnessing our lives. So what I try to help people do is like, okay, let's figure out, do we have this guilt or anger that's blocking us? Because if you're feeling guilty, for example, you might feel like I don't deserve to feel better. If you feel anger, because grief takes a lot of energy to process. If you're spending all your energy being angry with somebody, you don't have any energy to work on your grief. So it's like, let's remove those blockages. Let's look at the grief, but then let's look at what really happened here. Did your loved one, I really feel sad for people that think their loved one is gone, right? Because that is when I hear people say, I'm never going to see them again. That's like the saddest words I hear people say, because it's, first of all, it's not true. And secondly, it's a energy that just brings you down. Um, Going back to my experience when Shayna passed, I remember people talk about moving on, and I'm a very visual person, so I would envision Shayna having ceased to move at 20 June 15th 2014 or 2015, that 20, and she just was there, and I was moving away from her, and that just drove me crazy. And then I realized, after listening to you and other people like you, I'm actually moving toward her, that I'm going to, every day I'm getting closer to see her again. And bonus, I get to communicate with her even now. So she's not gone. If I can hold those things in my mind, it makes the grief journey bearable. I still want to see her physically. I still, I long for that. That's why her pictures in my background. I look at her all day, every day. I communicate with her every day. I look forward to the time that we're reunited, but I also know that I've got work to do. I tell people, if you're here on the planet, then first of all, it's a very privileged thing to be here. It's as weird as it might sound to people, because it's crazy and it's hard, but we choose to come here. And if you're here for a reason, and you've got work to do. So do your work, and then you get to go home and have fun.
Yes, we all have work to do, don't we? How do you communicate with Shayna? Just talk to her? Do you do writing? How
Yeah,
do you do
that's
it?
a really interesting question, because for everybody it's different. So I don't, I would like people. Some people do automatic writing, and that works for them. Some people, I meditate a couple times a day. But I was talking to people, and I realized we all seem to like want what other people have. 'Cause I hear people, oh, dream visits. Everybody wants dream visits, and I get those, but they're not that often. Some people, when they go into meditation, they'll, like you were saying, the IADC, they'll actually feel like their loved ones, like they're with them physically. I've never really had that experience. But what I realize is I do communicate with her, but her thoughts sound like my thoughts, and sometimes I'll hear it in her voice. But it's an internal voice, and it reminds me of when I was again back in the church, and I'd hear people say things like, God told me this or God told me this, and I was like, what's the deal? God doesn't talk to me. Why are you getting messages from God? I'm not getting these messages. So I started asking people, well, what do you mean God told you this? And then they would tell me, well, it's a feeling or it's an internal voice. Or I'm like, oh, well, I get that too. And so my communication with Shayna is mostly through that, but through my mindfulness and stuff like the things I do to keep myself kind of open. I feel like we're almost one. I mean, our thoughts they're kind of sometimes hard to differentiate. So those ways, but also I do get the physical things. I get the signs. I get the synchronicities. I get just amazing, signs from Shayna, that remind me that she's, also here, in a physical way, or can or at least interact with the physical.
Thank you very much. Would you be so kind and just talk a little bit about helpingparentsheal.org? And I know we have a lot of parents joining us now and some
Yeah,
not parents, and I know the YouTube channel is open for all. And then I'd like to get into some of the things that you've been up to
sure.
personally.
Helping Parents Heal is an amazing, amazing organization. I was fortunate enough to discover, like, I don't know, a couple of months after Shayna passed, again, through one of those synchronicities, someone said, reach out to Mark Ireland, who's one of the co founders. I reached out to Mark. He was very gracious. He sent me a couple of his books. Then I met Elizabeth Busan. We happened to go on vacation in Phoenix, which is where she lives. And so all these things worked out. I've been with Helping Parents Heal for, wow, I guess probably 9 years now. I'm on the board with Helping Parents Heal now. I speak at the conferences. It's an organization for parents who have, we don't like the word lost, but have children in spirit. When we first started, like, we had bereaved parent in our description, where we start off as bereaved parents, but our goal is to move to what we call shining light parents, which has a twofold meaning, where our children are shining lights that kind of lead our way, but also we can become shining lights. And I've seen parents transformed through this organization into people that are just like shining. We just had I guess it was our third conference last year, in Arizona and Phoenix. There was, like, I think a little bit over 1,000 people, and it's wild when you go to these conferences. The energy is so high, and the places that we go, the Wild Horse Pass, I think it's called, in Arizona. We ran out. We had the whole place, the entire place, and so the staff's like, "Who are these people? They're happy. They're smiling." It's like, "Oh, those are the bereaved parents." So that's what the organization does for people. I've seen it transform people. So I'm proud to be a part of Helping Parents Heal, which is another thing is really responsible for where I am today.
Thank you very much. Now let's talk about grieftogrowth.com, what you offer, what people can find on your website. I also want to find out about the podcast and your coaching.
Yeah, well, everything's at grieftogrowth.com, as you said, grief numeral two. I do grief guidance. I'm a certified grief educator. I do general life coaching, anything a life coach would do with people. I teach people mental fitness, like, because it's really important once we have these thoughts that we know we want to have, how do we keep them? How do we manage our minds and our bodies, which is really important. So I have a technique I call GEMS, GEMS, for gratitude, exercise, meditation, self care. So these are four things I practice every day, and I encourage all my clients and everybody else to do, because it can really keep your energy high. I've got the podcast. I've got a couple of books. The GEMS is a book. I've got a book called Grief to Growth. I have an online community, which is grieftogrowth.com/community. It's right now about 400 people, mostly parents, but not all parents. Mostly people who have lost someone, but not all. And we talk about this stuff. We can be open. We can be honest with each other. We can ask questions. So I've got the online community. So that's what I offer, and I'm starting up small groups. So if you join the community, you'll have announcements of the small groups I'm starting up, because I do a lot of one-on-one coaching, but I know not everybody can afford that, so I want to make it more affordable for people to reach me through groups. And I'm really excited because just in the last month or so, I joined John Edward on his Evolve Plus TV platform. So I'm delivering content there also, and that's I don't. There's thousands of people on there. So I was really honored that they asked me to join that community. So I'm working with them now, and I have a Substack. So it's substack.com/grief to growth, I believe it is. But if you go to Substack and look for grief to growth, I've got a Substack there. So I'm trying to reach people like any way that I can. I feel very honored that people are reaching out to me at this point, and that's what I do.
I'm so proud of you. I truly am. And it's interesting because I know there's people that like me because they're listening right now, or hopefully you like me, but I'm not the voice for everyone. And people can really resonate with you, Brian. You're likable, you're caring, people can find themselves in you. I'm not a parent, nor will I probably ever be, but people can relate to you. I mean, you really are kind, loving. You are who you think you are. I mean, really, you have integrity, you're honest, you're loyal, you're just a good guy. So I recommend everyone check out Grief to Growth. Start there, and there's so much more. Would you mind, just as a final thing, going into gems a little bit more?
Hmm.
It really sparked my interest, but I think people can certainly get your book and find out more on your website. But I think that might be a nice little gift just to leave with our listener or our viewer today. A little bit
Sure,
more about gems, and
sure,
then we'll
yeah.
conclude.
After several years of going through this and trying all different kinds of things to figure out what's going to work for me, um, it's like they're like I said, they're basically four things that I found that are really really easy to do, that everybody can do every day. And it starts with gratitude. And every time I say that, I kind of like I remember how I used to roll my eyes when people talked about gratitude practice. I'm like, again, very practical guy. How is this going to help me? Right? There's nothing great going on in my life right now. Everything sucks, and that's a natural human tendency. Our brains tend to focus on what's negative. If that's you, if someone's going through that, there's nothing wrong with you. That's our default mode, but we can get out of that. So, just really simply, I was talking with a client yesterday whose son passed away very recently, a little kid, and she's like, so how do I do this gratitude thing? How do I make it a regular thing? So I gave her a little tip. I said, there's a free app on your phone called Journal. If you have an iPhone, you can journal it. I said, but something really easy to remember is before you get out of bed, when you wake up in the morning, before you even open your eyes, think of three things you're grateful for. And for me, a lot of times it's like it's warm because I hate the cold. So in the winter, I'm in my bed and it's warm, or it may be that I'm having dinner with friends tonight, or it may be I was sitting in my office one day and I was giving someone an example. I said I've got electricity, and we all think, well, electricity. We don't even think about it. We just turn on the lights and they come on. I said, but do you think about the time like there's a power outage, that feeling you get when the power comes back on and the lights come on and the refrigerator starts running, you get this feeling of like it's like a jolt, right? Because you're grateful for having the power. So what if you had that feeling when it hasn't gone off? So I'm like, this is what the gratitude practice will do for you. So if you, I like to walk. I walk pretty much every day, and I'll think I'm grateful that my feet are okay. I'm grateful that my back is feels good. Stuff like that. So gratitude is what I start with. Exercise, because the mind body connection is really important. People, a lot of times, spiritual people, we can kind of tend to bypass the body, but our body influences how we feel. There's a feedback loop between our body and our mind and our spirit. So keep your body as strong as you can. So for me, it's walking. I tell people find what works for you. It might be yoga, it might be gardening, it might be whatever it is, whatever works for you. I interviewed one woman on my podcast, and her mother passed, and people are giving us all this advice like try yoga, try this, try that. She got into powerlifting, and it's like powerlifting was a thing that just like really turned her on because she could shape her body. It made her feel strong. She liked the repetition. So I'm like, yeah, that find what works for you. So that's the exercise piece of it. Again, try to find something you can do daily. It could be walking 10 minutes after dinner. It can be very helpful. Getting out in the sun, vitamin D. There's a whole lot of benefits into it. mindfulness or meditation, which a lot of people push back on. They say, can't meditate. And I say to people, if you can't meditate, you just haven't found the right technique yet. You can do it any way you want. So get out of your mind. It has to be sitting on a cushion for 30 minutes without moving and shutting off your mind, because you're never going to shut off your mind. So again, I love technology. So I use Insight Timer on my phone. So I like the app because it keeps track of like what my streak is. So I'm a very like competitive guy. So I took a 365-day challenge to meditate every day for 365 days. I ended up sticking with it for like 4 years. I didn't miss a day. Um, so whatever mindfulness technique works for you, and I work with people to figure out what works for them. And then the S is for either sleep or self care, and it's actually both. So when it comes to sleep, again, our bodies, we need sleep. I think our spirits need sleep too. This world is hard, and I think because I think again, I'm like as a rational person, why do we sleep? What's the point of like zonking out and not being here? Well, there's a spirit or physical need. If we don't have sleep, we will literally go insane. We will die without sleep. But also, I think our spirits need that release, and I believe that we leave our bodies, when we sleep. So, getting good sleep habits. I try to get to bed about the same time every night during the week when I have to get up the next day. Um, Keeping the room dark and cool. All those things everybody knows. Do those things. But also self care, because people in our society don't practice self care enough. You have to really prioritize yourself. So that can involve not just sleep, but also during the day. I work from home, taking breaks and building breaks into your day. Um, Not working too much. Have a good work life balance. Um, uh, a lot of people I know that are people pleasers. They'll do everything for other people, but they don't take care of themselves. Putting yourself as a priority. So I really help people, go through that. So those are the four steps. And as I said, the great thing is you can literally start doing them all tomorrow. You can start today. You can wake up and do your gratitude. You can take a short walk. You can practice a little bit of mindfulness. If it's just 2 minutes sitting at your desk, close your eyes and just count your breaths for 2 minutes. So that's the gems thing that I really encourage everybody to do.
Thank you. What's the benefit of having a coach versus just starting this on our own?
Yeah, that is a really great question because when I got into coaching, I'm thinking about it. One of my intuitive friends, she's a medium, and she sent me a message on Facebook one day. She said, "There's this life coaching course online. You should probably take it." I'm like, "Why would I do that?" I laughed at life coaches, like a lot of us do. It's like, "Oh, you have a life coach. Oh, I'm a life coach." And I tell people I'm kind of like because I'm older, I'm like, think of me as like a professional dad, right? So I as a life coach, I can give advice. My daughter's a mental health counselor. They're not supposed to give advice. I can relate personal stories to people, which my daughter's like, she's not supposed to. So I've had a lot of people come to me and say, I've got a therapist, I've been to a psychiatrist. Just being with you is different. You don't judge me. Because I don't judge people. I am a coach. I know it's funny. I was talking to a client one day. He goes, "You're just saying that because it's your job to encourage me." I'm like, "Well, it is my job to encourage you, but I really mean it." Every client I've had is exceptional. They are just amazing people. The thing is, they just don't really sometimes know it. So I can reflect back to them like, instead of worrying about or thinking about what you haven't done, let's think about what you have done. Let's think about how far you have come. Let's think about the fact that you got out of bed this morning, that you picked up the phone and made, or not, pick up the phone. That's how old I am. But that you made this appointment, that you set up an appointment with me. I'm like, that's a step, right? So I encourage people. It also helps to hold people accountable because they know, like, if they've set up an appointment with me, like, I'll give people homework. Here's my gems book. I want you to start practicing this. So next week, I'll ask them, "What have you done this week?" So that accountability helps people to motivate them to move them forward. People in grief really need to be witnessed. We really want to tell our stories to someone who's going to listen to us, not judge us, and relate to us. So there's that aspect. There's a lot of benefits to having a life coach. having a friend is great. It's funny that I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and she's been through a lot of hard times. She goes, "I just can't keep dumping all this on my friends because, as a friend, your friends want to hear your burdens, but you don't want to just be like dumping on them." Well, with me, this is your time. You've got an hour. It's all about you. You don't have to worry about asking about me. You don't have to worry about my feelings. So you get that freedom to just be loved on, to just to be able to accept for an hour with someone that you don't have to get back to.
I love that. People need people, and even if you think of athletes, yeah, you can train on your own, but how far you get with a coach. And as human beings, we're left with that voice in our mind, and it's not often too empowering, but to have somebody who looks at you and sees the real you and
Hmm.
empowers you. And I think it's wonderful to be able to be coached and loved and cared for and encouraged. And we get farther in life with a coach than sometimes not. So it depends. Some people are real self motivated, others need to be reminded of their greatness and have somebody to help hold their hand and lead the way. So,
Yeah. I think we all need to have someone hold a hand and lead the way. Now, whether that's a paid coach or not, some people may not need that. I mean, it's not for everybody, but it's, again, some people need that little bit of extra help. Another thing about coaching is, at least for me, it's not necessarily a long term thing. I'm not an psychoanalyst. It's the relationships are not usually years long. I do have clients that I work with, on a regular basis, but most people 3, 4, 5, 6 sessions, and then they move on, and then they'll come back. I'll check in with them, and they might book a few sessions later. But it's not like you have to be with me every week for a year. It's not that kind of a thing.
yeah, that's great. You just get people back, remind them who they are, and know that that grief is growth. It absolutely is. Brian, last minute thoughts or final closing words. Reach into that beautiful heart and wise with that wisdom you have. What last do
Um,
you want to share?
Yeah, the biggest thing is, as I said, at the beginning, you're asking about this, what is there waiting for us and all that. My thing is, and I'm going to give credit to my friend Kelvin because he's the same way. It's like I say we are the anti-suffering guy. We are the fear people. I want to put people's mind at ease. I want to alleviate people's fear, and I want people to understand that it's all good. And I want to end with this. I love this quote by John Lennon. He said, "Everything will be okay in the end. If everything is not okay, it's not the end." So just remember, there's always another chapter to be written. Always another chapter.
I thank you very much. Brian, thanks so much for being our guest today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I enjoyed it a lot.
I did too. Always nice to catch up. And for our listener or our viewer, thank you certainly for being here today. Please remember to check out Brian's book, Grief to Growth Planted, Not Buried. Also, the GEMS book. You can visit grieftogrowth.com. Go to YouTube. My gosh, does he have a lot of really wonderful, empowering interviews there and episodes of his podcast. So much there. Just type in Grief to Growth. As a reminder, my home base is we-don't-die.com. Like I said, you can go to the bottom of the page, enter your name and email address. It says you get the first few chapters of my book, We Don't Die. It's really the entire book. There's all kinds of other bonuses that I put in there that I think you'll find very, very interesting. I encourage everyone to come join us on a Sunday gathering, 2 p.m. New York time, every single Sunday. They're non denominational services, very empowering. There's music, there's a reading, there's an address, very inspirational. But the last 45 minutes or so, it's a medium demonstration. So we get to reconnect people all over the world with their loved ones. And not only that, you get to see how close our loved ones really are. So it's pretty darn cool. That's our Sunday gathering at we-don't-die.com. So in closing, my name is Sandra Champlain. I'm always so happy to be your host on We Don't Die. I do believe that life is an education for the soul. And yeah, that we chose to come here. It's difficult, but it will pay off in the long run for our soul. So I really want to thank you for listening or for watching, and we'll see you again soon.